Group 20, Case Study 3, Bias and Facial Recognition.
Amazon recently announced a one-year moratorium on allowing police to use its facial recognition tool, Rekognition. Clearview AI, in response to recent privacy investigations, no longer offers its facial recognition to RCMP. In addition to immense privacy concerns, facial recognition has a concerning bias problem. Bias in algorithms is a problem that has become increasingly apparent in computer science, and many computer scientists are finding ways to insist, as professionals, that the industry requires accountability for bias in algorithms. The purpose of this case study is to improve awareness of racial and gender biases in algorithms by focusing on the bias concerns of facial recognition software. Facial recognition software first takes as input a photograph or a frame from a video. This software takes the input and locates the face in the photo and finds the geometry of said face. This includes the size of your features such as eyes, nose, and chin, as well as the distance between these features. This creates a facial signature that is unique to said person. Then we can compare the signature to a database of known faces to identify the correct person, or we can compare to a single face to verify if the signature matches. Clearview AI is a software company founded in 2017 that provides facial recognition software to law enforcement agencies and private companies. They have the technology and database to match more than 3 billion photos indexed from the internet. To obtain these images, Clearview AI searches and scrapes the open web to identify photographs with faces. Anywhere public could be somewhere Clearview AI gets their images from. However, in 2020, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and other large online companies sent Clearview AI a cease and desist, claiming their data collection techniques violate their terms and conditions. In February of 2020, the Privacy Commissioner of Canada also launched an investigation into Clearview AI. In July, before the conclusion of the investigation, Clearview AI ceased to offer their technology in Canada, which included a contract with the RCMP. Also, as of 2020, Canadians are allowed to opt out of appearing in Clearview AI search results. Other places such as the EU, the UK, California, and Australia can opt out, but typically that decision relates to their privacy laws.
So now we're going to move on to the problems of facial recognition systems. So as we know, the accuracy varies for each system. Each system has its own data set. And here we have from the Nature article a review of false positive from a UK academic algorithm and a Chinese commercial algorithm. So we can see that the most misidentified people are American Indian females and American Indian males. It's not hard to imagine that American Indian females and males don't have a large representation in data sets. So naturally, they are more commonly misidentified. And then as this echoes the finding of Joyce research, which finds that minorities are much less likely to be identified correctly and white males are at the top of the accuracy. So in this chart we can see that one white male for every 10,000 pictures there was a mistake. 1 in 10,000. So we can always obviously see the bias there. Then some organizations that are using this technology are saying they comply with NIST benchmarks. So NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which just advises some government bodies on how to keep their cybersecurity in order and all their information systems. So obviously this is not enough to justify facial recognition. Another important point is that it may violate individual privacy. So from Clearview or all the other systems, your picture is there and nobody asks you if that's okay. Your biometric data now lives in several databases without your consent or without oversight at all. So your privacy is clearly violated. And then false positives from mistaken identification could lead to violent incidents. So it's not hard to imagine someone being misidentified as a violent criminal or a terrorist. You can at least expect some harassment from police enforcement. So it's very dangerous, this technology.
3 primary resources for this case study is an article in Nature magazine titled, "Is Facial Recognition Too Biased to be Let Loose?" The PhD project of Joy Buolamwini that describes how various algorithms used by companies such as Microsoft and IBM perform worse on people of color and on biological males compared to females. And lastly, the Algorithmic Justice League, founded by Joy Buolamwini in 2016 to raise awareness of the social implications of artificial intelligence through art and research. However, these case study resources are not objective truth and should be recognized for their own sets of biases within. For example, the Nature magazine takes a sort of anti-growth stance in the sense that it gives visibility and precedence to groups that are seeking to remove the technology from use, either from police or just in general, rather than cover potential efforts to improve the technology. The article even dismisses company improvement, going into no detail and simply saying that researchers and activists remain skeptical. Furthermore, the gender shade study has its own inaccuracies and biases that can be seen in the selection criteria used to create its own dataset. For example, the countries that were selected to represent white faces were Finland, Sweden, and Iceland, which are all Scandinavian countries. This will remove the diversity of other face types in, for example, Mediterranean region. This isn't to say that this dataset is particularly poor, though. It's simply a testament to the difficulty of having a truly equal dataset, and equality is of course always a question of with regards to what.
Now I'm going to talk a bit about the additional resources. The first one from the required readings for this past week, why algorithms can be racist and sexist. We all read it. I'll just reiterate it to bring up the memories. Is that introduces the notion of algorithm bias, shows in a simplified way how these systems are trained and how important the data sets are. Then talks about how transparency in these systems and how they're trained, who made them, is very important for accountability and to identify where potential biases could be. The second source is facial recognition is accurate if you're a white guy from the New York Times. This one primarily discusses the findings of Joy's research. That's the woman from the interviews, also from our required readings. And then the third one is the Clearview AI still backs facial recognition despite competitors' concerns from CNET. In this one, it's an interview with the CEO of Clearview. He, of course, naturally defends his company and says there's no social bias in their tool. He says after Joy's findings, after it was kind of mainstreamly reported that some algorithms have bias against minorities and women, he mentions that his company did try running those tests against their own systems, and he couldn't find any social bias. And he also always defends his company, mentioning that his is for security, for law enforcement, so it's not open to anybody, and he apparently justifies that it's law enforcement, so we can do this and we can ignore everybody's privacy.
So now, why is what we've talked about important, and how can it affect you? Well, it can be easy to ignore the danger of biased facial recognition, especially if you fall into a group which has sufficient representation in training datasets, for example, white biological males. But by elaborating on the real dangers that these biases create in their various uses of the data, this presentation seeks to raise awareness of the issue to us as computer scientists because, as we enter the field, we have the ability to influence positive change in our places of work. And this goes for all sorts of algorithms, not just facial recognition. Facial recognition fills a niche as a type of algorithm where bias is visible, especially thanks to the work of organizations such as the AJL and people such as Joy Buolamwini. whose tireless work have provided us with a wealth of supporting research to show that facial recognition has sorts of biases. However, despite the bias present in facial recognition, there are several positive uses of the technology to benefit society, particularly in the medical sector. For example, facial recognition software has been used to analyze facial patterns to estimate heart rate and breathing, which helps for identifying patients, for example, with COVID-19 based on the common symptoms of fever, coughing, and shortness of breath for the pandemic. In addition, facial recognition can be used for validating identity during check-in, and also allows for diagnoses to occur without requiring close contact, a benefit for audiences uncomfortable with close contact, for instance, small children, as well as for highly infectious diseases such as COVID. In addition, various police departments have expressed success in using the Clearview AI to be able to capture several dangerous criminals. False positives can, of course, occur, though, so a valuable discussion question is, what are the risks of false positives in different use cases, such as medical diagnosis versus police profiling?
I think that part of the hope of developing AI that classifies and decides for us is that we can create a system that makes neutral and objective decisions. This week showed me that racial bias and prejudice in general carries on to the technology. As we have seen in the past weeks, technology is not in a vacuum, and it carries the prejudices of the people who create it. So this was very...
What's particularly interesting for me is what the Nature article describes as human overconfidence in machines, especially since it raises the question, are people such as the police trusting these machines as unbiased and acting accordingly, or are they recognizing the biases but using its false positives as shaky justification to enforce their own preconceptions?
It's an important conversation to have. Part of ensuring that people are treated the same despite a different gender or race means also ensuring that our technology does the same. Bias can appear in strange and unique ways, but perhaps art and technology imitates life.
Pursuing convenience and efficiency often contributes to racism and/or sacrifices individual privacy. Since technology always precedes legislation, we need to be careful when putting it into practice.
So we can summarize, when data sets are not diverse, machine learning algorithms can perpetuate biases against minorities and women. False positives can also lead to harassment and even violent incidents when law enforcement employs facial recognition. We should also acknowledge that facial recognition has a wide range of applications, which are not strictly limited to policing. So there's several examples in healthcare. We linked a paper saying how facial recognition can be used to see the heart rate of a person. There's also several systems for safe driving that look at people's eyes to see if they're tired. It's not the technology that's evil. There's many ways to go about it. We also can say that privacy is a big concern in facial recognition, and that the law is not yet clear on how data should be managed. So these companies basically right now have a free rein. They've been doing it in the background. And only now that there's some articles by the New York Times, another big publication, is that lawmakers are focusing their attention. And law is eventually catching up. As we mentioned, some states have banned facial recognition, but this is far from the united stance we need to safeguard the privacy of individuals.
Finally, some discussion questions to bring up with the audience here. What do you think an unbiased dataset would look like for training facial recognition? How do we decide when facial tracking is justified? Is it okay to use it for violent crimes, terrorism, epidemic contact tracing? And who should be held accountable for incidents relating to false positives from facial recognition software? Software developers, data scientists, CEOs, police chiefs?